Hey everyone, welcome back to Devs in the Shed. I think I heard an SMS come through at the end of that music, so we're actually going to do something a little bit different today. We are we always keep it hands-on development on the stream, right? That's why we go into our sheds because that's where all of our tools are outside of our laptops themselves, Raspberry Pis and such. But yeah, we actually are going to do something a little bit different. We're going to have kind of like speed rounds, I guess. Is that the word that we want to call them, Paul? But the idea is that
Micro segments? I don't
micro
know.
segments. We'll let the chat vote on what we should label this. But we're going to show basically 15 minutes across three different things. Something from Aaron, something from Paul, something from myself that we've spent a little bit of time on that we thought would be interesting.
I
So
was supposed to prepare something.
yeah. Yes. Do you want to go first, Aaron? Is that
Somebody else go first. I'll prepare something while you're doing it.
Well, I mean that's just-in-time programming that right there, right? I mean, good thing you were a C# developer, so you know about just-in-time.
That's a good idea. I might do something on C#.
yeah. Well, if you do something on C Sharp, it might take you a little bit longer than 15 minutes to put together.
Yeah.
It's not as quick as Python, but maybe
It'll-
it runs
it'll be-
faster.
It'll be 5 minutes to put together. It'll just take 15 minutes to compile.
Yep, yeah. Cool.
Maybe it would be good to see where people are from today because we had some internal catch-ups and we were talking about where our audience are from, and yeah, like obviously if you're new to the show, you won't know where we are, but all three of us are in Melbourne, Victoria, in Australia. So yeah, where is everybody from? And I specifically asked that because if people are in Australia, have you gone ahead and registered and thought about Summit, the event coming up in a few weeks? So SF, I've got San Francisco here.
Nice. New York.
I assume SF and New York City will be attending the US-based summit. But if you haven't registered yet, still go and register for Summit.
Yeah, we'll put the link in the chat for the Australian Summit. The other thing is, very sneakily, we do have a special URL, and I'm looking to try and grab it from my side. But we've got a special URL that if you use and you're going for your AWS exams, it will give you 50% off. So somebody shared it with me the other day, and I thought I'll reshare it to everyone here. So give me 2 seconds. So
yeah, I think that's a good one to share. Week after week, we have people that are talking about what training they should do, what exams they should do, and the relevance of those exams. And even though doing the training, even for the base training, right, like the cloud practitioner, I think it's like 100-ish Australian dollars. Having 50% of that lowers that barrier to entry. And the good thing is that once you've done your first certification for AWS, you get a discount coupon for the next certification. So effectively, then you can get 2 certifications for sort of definitely for the price of one. But now with 50% off in the beginning, that bar is really low at the beginning. And I don't know, when you guys went for your first certificate, did you find that the moment you got one, you wanted to get another one?
Aaron.
Yeah, as soon as my foray into AWS started at the associate level. So I started with Dev Associate, and then I went and did a Solutions Architect Associate. After I'd done those two, it was kind of like, oh man, I've got the 50% voucher. Now I'm going to go and do my pros. So I started that way and then ended up getting specialty certs as well. So it doesn't stop.
How many certs do you have then?
I think I actually need to renew a few, but currently active, I think I've got 4 or 5 at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, I've got 4, but none of my specialty and none of my pro.
So, my Alexa Skill Builder specialty certificate is still valid for another year. So,
yeah. I always like freebies, and I saw this one. I was like, I'll share it with everyone. We'll post it for the next couple of weeks, just because I think it is really good, and it makes it easier to go through the barrier to certification, because you might end up paying for training. AWS has got free good training on the website, or video training. But like, there's a Cloud Guru, which I really love, like Linux Academy, which is one and the same as a Cloud Guru these days. There's a number of people on Udemy that have really good courses, and so you pay for the course and you pay for exam tryouts and then you pay for the exam itself. It can kind of end up being a bit expensive end to end. I did my cloud practitioner just before I joined AWS, because I actually had cloud experience not on AWS originally, and I had a lot of on-prem. So I went for cloud practitioner, and then I think I stacked everything, got all my associates, and then basically I've been wanting to challenge myself and go for the pro certs. But I keep getting into situations where it's like, I'm time poor, I'll do it over Christmas, and then I get tied up with projects over Christmas. So my goal is I'll probably be using that exam code as well. My goal is hopefully to get the Developer Pro and then maybe the SA Pro as well. Paul, what about yourself though, asking the question?
I think like I also started with Cloud Practitioner, and people sort of ask, should I do that or not? And my advice is always just do it. Like it's not a huge amount of study. It gets you over the barrier of getting the one pass. I mean, I'm a nervous exam taker. So, going through something that's, not too difficult to obtain, it helps familiarize yourself with like the terminology and the lingo. Plus, what it looks like to do the exam. I mean, I think all the exams now you can do online. So you're familiar with the process and you can do that, and it's not too difficult to pass. And then, like you said, you get that coupon for the next one. So you might as well use your 50% off on the cheapest exam. It costs you, like $50, $60 to do the first exam. Then you've got a 50% off coupon for the difficult ones that cost a little bit more. So
yeah, you do it exactly the same way as me. I was like, I'll use the 50% off on the more expensive exams, and like I kept stacking that.
Yep,
yeah,
that's what I did.
Really cool. Okay, well, enjoy
right.
the code, everyone. Pause the video, watch it on YouTube again or Twitch if you need to see that code again later. You want to go first, Paul? Like, you want to show off like your 15-minute segment that you've got?
I'll go first today. So there's something like we have this, we have so many different services, and we're all builders, and customers like to build and engineers like to build all the time. And I had recently a customer talk about like a one-time password solution, and I was saying like, what do you guys have that can help support that? And some of their engineers have put together a little bit of a design piece. And I've done it even with talking to some other friends before, and you see one-time password. I mean, just to familiarize us with anybody that's not familiar with what we mean by one-time password, that is, I want access to a specific website or something like that, and then I provide like a half or partial mechanism to be able to log in. So like, for example, my phone number or my email address. And then rather than having to remember the password every time to log in, or some way to additionally validate me, I will, say I'll request a one-time password. I'll get an SMS or a direct email. In this case, it would be SMS. I get that one-time password. I can use that password once to log in, and I can get in. So I don't need to like worry about having to remember specific passwords. I have a password. It's regenerated every single time. It's sent to me via SMS. I can use that once, and that's it to go forward. Internally for our payroll system that we use here at work, I have the same thing set up. And like, honestly, I like it. I don't have to worry about changing my password all the time. I don't have to worry about saving it anywhere. Every time I go in and SMS me a password, I log in, easy to go. Now, if we think about what I started talking about with engineers and, one-time password, some of the ideas that were coming up were like, we could build a Lambda function, and then we could have a Lambda function and that could talk to Dynamo. So we'll keep it serverless. We'll take the in this case will be like SMS. We'll take our that mobile phone number, and we'll store that mobile phone number in DynamoDB, and we'll put like a specific reference ID against it. So the one-time password's typically got a reference ID that you're validating against, and then we'll say like, okay, so when is that password going to be valid to? And we'll say like 5 days or something. So we'll set a time 5 days in the future. And then we've got some information about like what that is, and we generate some sort of random token, so a one-time password, store that in DynamoDB, and then we'll take that and we'll use SNS and our serverless notification service, and send an SMS to that person's phone, and that person will then get, an SMS message. Then you have another Lambda function that will take that SMS, that message that we've got, that one-time password, check DynamoDB against that phone number, whether or not it's valid in that specific point in time, and to check whether that one-time password was the password that you've put through, and then you return true or false whether they're valid to go through. And really, like that, there's not a whole lot to something like that until you start to think about what it means to build and operate, like even just small platforms. You've got your deployments around that, you've got the permissions, you've got a DynamoDB table, you have to put the scaling on the DynamoDB table, you want some optimization around costs, so do work out like what your provision throughput is for that. Then you want to say, but I want to purge old one-time passwords out of the database. How many times do I allow them to retry? So you start building like logic, and it starts getting complicated. It gets complicated real quick, even though at the beginning it's only Lambda, API gateway, DynamoDB, and SNS. You've got permissions across all three. What do you want to do there? So we have a solution for that, and that is like by leveraging like Pinpoint. So Pinpoint is a platform for doing much more than just one-time password. And so we won't go into like what the rest of it does. And at some point we'll probably dive into that. But John already says it here, like, one-time password is also useful for resetting passwords as well. So, there's use cases for it, and it's easy to go ahead and work with. And especially if you're SMS, everyone's got their phone in their hand. So it's much easier than email to get that.
You mean like that SMS now?
Yeah, that happened to me with my wife, but somebody, either yourself or Matt, sent an SMS using my predefined demo.
No.
But okay, well, somebody did. Maybe it was some lag or something. I don't know. But I'll take you through the steps to like create like a Pinpoint application and show like really how easy it is to go ahead and set it up. Now I've got one that's built at the moment, but what I'll do is we'll create a new project. I'll do dev shed. I'll go ahead and create that. So for your Pinpoint application you're going to create, you're going to like enable certain things. So there's mobile analytics, web analytics, email, SMS, and voice, push notifications. All we want to do is do SMS. So you need to enable the SMS channel. So there's specific channels that Pinpoint will interact with. And then you can go ahead and determine whether or not you want transactional or promotional like messages that you're going to send out. And I guess if it's transactional, that will be like I guess like higher up the priority of like where that SMS is going to go. Where it's promotional, it's non-critical content such as like a marketing message. Doesn't matter if it goes out as urgently as what you need to do. When you're configuring and building these at the beginning, you go ahead and you set an account spending limit. So this is a way where you can regulate how much the account is allowed to spend on messages in case you make a mistake or you set something out or whatever. You can put some hard restrictions on how much money.
I've got a question, Paul. Like, why?
Yep.
Like, if you're impatient like me, why wouldn't you always take transactional? Right? Is there a cost thing, or is it a compliance thing? Right? Like driving the two modes.
That's a good question, Matt. Let's just have a look and see what it says here. So, I mean, maybe you just look that up in the background because I don't know. I'm not sure whether there's a cost piece here. And yeah, maybe you just you answer that question while I keep going because I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, go. I do think there is a cost reason, but I also think there's a compliance reason. I'll double check in the background. Yeah.
Usually with things like that, there's some costing, and when I looked at it just quickly, then when you asked, I didn't look at the costing. When you go ahead and you create this, you're put into a sandbox, which allows you to effectively not spam. So it's usually I think it's $1. I think this is per month. So you're only allowed to spend a couple of SMSs. Once you've built and spec'd out your application, you need to go ahead and raise a support request. And that support request will take you out of that sandbox. So then you can set, $100, $50, thousands, whatever that might need to be. And then the optional sender ID. So that's the ID that's going to come up on the device that you're sending the message to. So when it looks like a number, or it's going to come up on your phone as Paul demo in this instance would be what we'll do here. You don't really have to configure anything else for advanced options, but you can request specific phone numbers and like get yourself like proper long codes and short codes for that. So you can have, if you want a specific number for that, for a specific region, and those numbers can come from like multiple different regions as well. So, there's ones for US and different countries around the world. I'll save the changes and we'll see sort of what that looks like. And at this point, we're pretty much like ready to go in this piece here. So if I go back to all projects and I'll go back to the one that I've set up, because this has got a little bit of data in here, we'll sort of have a look around what is, what you can sort of see here. We can see that, I thought I had more, but my account spending limit is at $1. So I'm like pretty close to spending all of that for this specific one. So I've probably got to watch like my spend here. So, I mean, I've spent 94 cents. I can't remember whether this is per day or not.
Yep.
But you can see here a little bit of a dashboard and like what your spend is. Here's where you go ahead and request that spending limit increase. And you could go ahead and do that. And you can also like request or change your sender ID if you need to. For the phone numbers, you can see here's where I've specifically set up a phone number. So my messages come from like that specific phone number, and you can specify what they need to be. So you may have like different ones for different countries, which means that if you're using Pinpoint to be able to send messages out, the number that it comes from could be a more localized number. I'm sure whenever we receive messages that come from an out of country number, I'm skeptical, I'm hesitant to do that. So that's a way to make sure that that's what it looks like.
Yeah, and I was going to say, John P333 said there's different laws around transactional versus marketing, I think. So that was what I was thinking. Turns out it's just a cost difference. So you can have a bit of cost savings, like if they use a cheaper route to get through to the messaging carriers through to the device, if you choose promotional. So you can get a bit of cost savings from that. Whereas what they do is they go down the route that's guaranteed to send the SMS out within a few seconds if it's for transactional, like you've got an OTP token, like in this example. Weirdly, marketing versus transactional here isn't used as an indicator around compliance. That's what I was double checking in the background. Compliance is like a different can of worms that's across all the messages. And basically, if you use it to send spam to individuals, people can report your number and you can basically have your phone number, disconnected, right? So there's a bunch of local laws in each country that you need to maintain compliance with when you send SMSs out. There's different levels of trust with long codes and short codes and this and that. So if you've got like a branded SMS URL, branded SMS number, and you can push like out your brand's name like within the actual SMS screen as well, like that's going to have more compliance than just simply sending a message from a random number. So that's where you might see, like, I'm going through mine, I've got a FedEx message from FedEx themselves that comes through to my phone with a FedEx number, but it displays as FedEx. Whereas I've got a spam one, which comes from some random country's number and has a random URL, right? And so I kind of reported that one up, and theoretically these numbers should get blocked.
Yeah, and that when you go and ask for your account to come out of Sandbox, they are looking for the evidence that says how do you manage people's ability to opt out and handle like bounces. That is part of like that request.
Yeah, what is the material as well as asked, like that you're sending? Like, yeah.
So yeah, it's there put in place to make sure that people can't just go and spin up an AWS account and start spamming people and doing the wrong thing, to make sure that you are like being compliant. And probably, like you said, it probably helps you if you're building or you're running like, I don't know, an e-commerce platform, to make you think about what you're doing to do things the right way. You don't want to be coming across as someone that's spamming people. You want to be, a legitimate provider. So if we then think about like what this is on the smaller scale, because this is a huge project here that we're going to demonstrate. Here's the demo that we've put together. Now, if you're quick enough, you can type this out and you can go ahead and like spam my phone. But if we were to like, I've simply like abstracted this thing. So it's, someone's done it to me a couple of times already.
That wasn't me.
You knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, that's okay. It's this isn't particularly my number, but I made it go to my number behind the scenes, so I can type in anything. It won't send the SMS. But
so you've hard coded your number in the application, but then you just it's just a dumb dialog box. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it still demonstrates how the application will work. I packaged it up in Python. I'll show you the code in just a second. So effectively, this is what you would be like. So let's just say you're at a call center and someone called up and they wanted to change some account details on themselves. If you're in the call center and you want to verify that somebody is who they say they are, and they say, yeah, that's my phone number. So we say, I'm going to send you a one-time password now. Can you read that back to me? So, the operator might go to, and that might be embedded in their application, however it needs to be. But for this example, I just made a little web page. We put in the phone number, we click submit. On the back end here, it's using Boto3. It will send that off to, I just wanted to keep that message open so I can show you. But it will send that message off to the SMS. It will use Pinpoint. I'll take you through the code in a second. I'll have got a one-time password sent to my phone. So I'll show you my phone here. It's hard. I don't know whether people can see it or not. But
we can tell that,
many one-time passwords.
Yeah. There's
which was definitely not me.
Yeah, and if you can see here, at the top, it's it's coming from Paul Demo, so that's how I can set that name. So I haven't changed that. My phone recognizes that's who it's coming from. I could have set that to devs in the shed, whatever I needed to do. Then I take that password, which is 398026, and then I go ahead and validate that, and then we do a second call using Boto, and it validates whether that one-time password and that number and the other specific variables I've set around how long that should be is a valid or not one-time password. So this is the demo that isn't much to look at, but it shows effectively what it would look like at the end consumer. Now, you would probably interact with that with an API or some third-party thing, but even the most simple piece at the moment, an application like this could work internally just to validate somebody if they had that phone number and you said, are you actually on that phone or not? We want to validate who you are, and I can see that you've called me up, and I know that your name is, Paul Kukil. Your number on file is this specific phone number. I'm going to send a message to that phone number. Tell me what that message is. Yes, you are the person that you said you are. So we can start, begin to validate what that looks like.
And you can also validate over email as another option as well, right? Like if they don't have the phone number handy, they're dialing from a landline. Not that I don't think people use landlines that much anymore, right?
I haven't had a landline for a very long time.
What's a landline?
Yeah.
I'm a millennial. I've never heard of a landline.
It's been a while since I've had a landline. So I'll show you my application now. It's really simple. There's a couple of HTML templates. I used Chalice to do this, and I deployed it into Lambda. Really, I'll show. I won't show too much about it other than very, very quickly on the front page. Here's that form that we saw. It takes them the phone number and goes ahead and pass that through. The validate page, once you submit that form, it goes to that page, send. Send then asks for the one-time password to put back in, and that sends you back to validate, and that tells you whether or not it was valid or not. But the core of the application is in here. There's not a lot to it. I had a function that was generating random reference ID. And we've seen some of this boilerplate code before, but this is really what it comes down to is what we're looking into the application. So using Boto3, I create an instance of pinpoints from Boto3. I pass in my application ID, and then there's a set of parameters that I'm passing across. So what we talked about earlier, the channel, the brand name, the code length, the validity period, and the allowed attempts. So you can specify the validity period when you're creating that one-time password, a couple of minutes or whatever. The allowed attempts to try and see whether that's right or not, because effectively, with a 5-character one-time password, you could brute force it, right? You could definitely do it. I mean, it'll take a long time, but you could. So if you said the allowed attempts is 2, then after 2, you need to resend a new one-time password. Language. The origin identity, so where it's coming from, the number it's coming from, the number it's coming to, and then a reference ID. So if you had an application that was maybe many times need to SMS that number, you want to have something additionally specific to where you're coming from. So you would pass that, you would create a reference ID plus the phone number, send it to my number, and then I would use that reference number and the one-time password to validate what that looks like. And this I've just hard coded all the time as just sample 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But you could change that every single time you were wanting to do that to make sure that if you had many systems using that, you can determine that that one-time password is specific to that referenced piece of the application, not just to that number, if that makes sense. And the second bit is, once I have got that one-time password, we then need to do another call to validate whether or not that one-time password was the password we expected. So I'm saying, again, here, I say the destination number, so the number that I sent the one-time password to, the reference ID that I attached to that specific instance of the one-time password, and the one-time password itself. The response from that as it comes back is, if we look here, it just comes back into this JSON block here. But if we look down at where I did the validate, I said, as part of that response, so like result is verify OTP, that's the method we called before, determine whether, it's valid or not. So I just want to set a variable. And that's, there's a JSON structure that's verification, response, and valid. That's either true or false. So I just say if it's valid, one-time password is expected, else incorrect one-time password. Then I just pass that message across to the template and render that out to show that. So, I used a bit of a template that we had before, pretty simple code, a really easy way to go ahead and implement it. Don't need to purge database, don't need to manage anything. This code is like written verbosely over multiple different lines, really easy to set up and do. And there's a bunch of like sample application code that, you can go ahead and set this up. Apart from getting your application out of sandbox, you can have this up and running, within less than half an hour. Obviously, you might want to like scrutinize a little bit more if you're taking it to production, but really easy to get out of the box rather than having to design your own with multiple different services. You'd spend half an hour just making sure that everything aligns and thinking about it before you even opened, Draw.io and started drawing it up. So I thought that was worth going through, and it's a nice, easy option. There is a cost for both the SMS and the one-time password service, but it's like very, very cheap. So that the SMS cost is, competitive, but the actual one-time service cost is, fractions of a cent. I think it was something like for 5,000 requests, it was like about $6 or something. I might do the calculations later and paste it into the thing. So very, very cheap. And when you're considering like what AWS does, and I've wanted to say this for a long time on the stream, but using one-time password from Pinpoint, AWS has done all the undifferentiated heavy lifting for you. So at that point, if there's any questions, I'll go ahead and answer those in the chat, but I'll pass across to Aaron or Matt.
I'm happy to go next.
You go next.
Cool.
I'm just doing an npm audit fix because I haven't updated this repo for like 6 months.
Awesome. Do you want to share my screen?
Yes, it is up now.
Awesome. I am going to hide our StreamYard behind that. Actually, let me minimize that so I don't scare myself later if I have to open other stuff. There we go. So what I'm going to talk about today, my little micro segment, is something that I've been presenting in a few different places, and just as recently as last night at the Melbourne.net meetup, is how we can develop a web API project. So if you're familiar with .NET Framework, and for those in the audience who feel like .NET is old and archaic, I'm using .NET 6, which is the latest version of .NET, which, if you understand the history of .NET, that's come from .NET Framework to .NET Core and .NET Standard, then the convergence of all three into .NET. So we're now at the most latest version of .NET, being .NET 6. This little project that I'm going to demonstrate is built on .NET 6, but what it's the power in it is not so much that it's the .NET 6 Web API project, but it's the execution engine, so the .NET 6 execution engine in Lambda, and then also using the serverless application model, so SAM templates, for deploying a .NET web application as a serverless application inside Lambda, utilizing Amazon API Gateway as a proxy. So essentially, in the diagram, I'm going to close this in a sec, but the diagram that you can see here is essentially, as a .NET developer, I can develop my web API project. I'm going to go through some of the differences in the code than what you would see in a standard .NET project. Standard .NET Web API project, and I'll go through the reasons for those. But essentially, I can create a .NET Web API project using our Lambda SAM template to be able to enable me to run them locally. So still using Kestrel as we do in .NET, to run a local version, run my unit tests, do whatever else I want to do locally, and then use the SAM library to actually deploy it. So using the CloudFormation and S3. So what actually happens is the SAM library compiles the .NET application, zips it into a zip, uploads it into S3, and then using the template, which we'll go through, uses CloudFormation to then deploy the serverless stack. So it will configure the API gateway. It will then take from the S3 zip and deploy into the Lambda, our web API, and all of the routing that you would do in a standard web API gateway. So using a controller with our routing is all still handled within the API gateway. So we don't actually have to set up any routing as we would have traditionally using REST API and setting up all our resources through API gateway. API gateway really just acts as a proxy to hand off the request through to Lambda. And then this is a this is the end of the animations in the slide, so you can see everything all laid over together. Why this is answering the question of why would we do this? So a lot of the conversations that I have had with .NET developers who aren't familiar with AWS and sort of more so familiar with other clouds are, why would we use .NET Web API specifically as serverless? And there's the simple answers around, well, if you've got containers, then you're paying for the container being active, so you're paying for compute that you're not using. When you're using serverless, then you can, only pay for usage. That's the obvious stuff. The not so obvious stuff is once you've got your web API project in Lambda, you now have access to all the other AWS services. So if we're using the C# SDK for AWS, the AWS SDK, which was the equivalent of the Boto library that Paul was just showing in Python, we can now we could set up and do something very similar to what Paul just demonstrated. We could talk to Pinpoint, or we can talk to all of the other services in AWS that have, APIs through the actual SDK. So it's really an entry point in this way into AWS ecosystem of services without actually having to understand how to go through and do all your ClickOps. So you don't need to get into your console. You don't need to set up services manually. You can do all of this through provisioning your CloudFormation template through the SAM module, SAM template, and also using the SDKs to then connect to all of the services that you set up through your CloudFormation. So I'm going to jump into the code to just demonstrate this little serverless stack here.
John P. Triple Free just said he's using Node with Lambda at the moment, and it's great not having the cold start times of .NET on Lambda. So we need less than 3-second response times for handling requests from Slack.
So I would respond to that in so much as, yes, a lot has been done across all Lambda execution environments to minimize the cold start. However,
especially Python and JavaScript, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially, so that's a great call out, especially Python and JavaScript, because these are interpreted languages. So this is where I want to get into when we're talking about large provisioning of concurrent Lambdas. Your efficiency comes not in the cold start, but in the concurrent activations or concurrent instances of a Lambda running. What I mean by that is, once you've got past your cold boot, so you're now in a warm state and you're receiving transactions, you're not going to get much more efficiency out of Python, JavaScript, or a interpreted language, because it has to reinterpret that language every time it's executed, right? The difference between that and a compiled language like Java or C# or any other Rust, if you wanted to get in and start building Lambda on Rust, is that it's already compiled. So you've received some of the efficiency in translating the code that you write into your compiled libraries. So there's a lot more efficiency now in the execution of the query. So if you have a lot of throughput on your Lambdas and they're already in a warm state, you've got multiple concurrent versions of your Lambda running, the actual execution of those Lambdas is more efficient than using a interpreted language. So that's when we get into enterprise level, like very large solutions, that's where we start to look at the differences between not just cold boot, but also execution. But that's a really good point. And it's not just the language that has an effect on cold boot. It is a lot of what the Lambda team has done over the last 2 years or last few years in how they do the provisioning, how they start the engine for execution. That has minimized a lot of the cold boot, irrespective of whether it's an interpreted language or a compiled language. All right, so I'll jump back onto track with what I was going to demonstrate. Before I jump into the code, I wanted to show you. So as a .NET developer, you'll be hopefully now, since the days of .NET Core, when we started to move towards command line instead of doing everything through Visual Studio Pro or Advanced. Now in .NET CLI, you can now install tools. And so what I've done prior to now is .NET tools install, and then I've installed the Amazon.lambda.serverless tools, and also templates. So there's a lot of templates that we can use. And I've just run the .NET new serverless list to list off these serverless templates. And the one that I'm going to take a specific look at right now is the serverless.asp.NET Core Web API. Now, it still has the .NET Core, the Net Core name on it. Obviously, everything's converged into the one stream now. So .NET 6 is no longer .NET Core, but it's just a legacy naming convention. Because the previous versions are also named ASP.NET Core Web API. What you'll see in terms of those who are .NET developers is some familiar structure in terms of the code, and then there'll be a few extra things that we've added in terms of the template, but then the real power comes not through just the template, but also through using the tools, so using the actual serverless deploy to actually take that template and deploy it into AWS. I'm just going to quickly jump over to, I think, let's stick with this one. So I'm still in the same project. I had two different windows open because I didn't want to confuse things. Let's take a quick look at the structure and then look at the differences. So probably the first thing that you'll notice that's the same is we've got our startup.cs. We've got our controllers inside the ASP.NET Web API project is your values controller. That's the standard one. If you wanted to do the minimal one, just an empty one, there is a template for that. So there's nothing there. You have to add all your own controllers. I'm using the values one because I want to show you some changes. You can see that I've made changes to it. It's yellow. I want to show you some changes that I've made to add a little bit of extra value to the values controller. No pun intended. Okay, so the things that you'll notice is different is you'll notice that there's no program.cs. And so the reason there's no program.cs here is actually because this local entry point is a rename of the program.cs. So it's doing exactly the same thing. But the reason we do this is because now we want to host our Web API project into a Lambda. We need to have a Lambda entry point, which is our additional file here, which if you ignore all of the commenting that comes out of the template, it's only a few lines of code, which is doing really essentially the same as what the local entry point does, but instead we're not using Kestrel, we're using the Lambda execution environment, and it's actually hooking up, so utilizing the API gateway proxy function library, it's hooking our startup, so all of the instructions for the web API gateway, into the handler for a Lambda. So it's now joining a Lambda handler with the Web API project to then hand off everything that comes through the Lambda handler into our Web API. So essentially, the local entry point here, our rename of program.cs, is what allows us to create our host build. So this will allow us to run locally. So I could run this now. I could then start doing tests on my local environment, local host. I can run my unit tests and just test everything locally before I was to push it into the cloud. All right, so I will cover off one other thing. One question that often comes my way when talking with people familiar with .NET is, well, what if I wanted to add additional components to my web API that I usually add inside the program.cs? And I would say, instead of loading them inside your program.cs at the host layer or host level where the container is created, load them in your startup.cs, because this gets loaded into both your local entry point and your Lambda entry point. So what I mean by that is, under our configuration services, as you can see, we've got add controllers. So at this stage, it's going through and it's pulling out any of my controllers that inherit from base controller and adding them to the stack. If I wanted to go and add, say, MVC, or even if I wanted to go and add Razor, I could add that to my services right here in Startup, and essentially that would allow me to create MVC pages or Razor-based pages through my Lambda and output them via the API gateway. So I'm not going to recommend this just because when we get into solid programming, there's, specifically the S in solid, single responsibility. I would be recommending a segregation of front end from back end. So keep your API as an API, do your front end in another way. However, if you wanted to do full MVC and Razor, there's the capability right there. You add it to your startup.cs, and it'll be included in both your Lambda entry point and your local entry point. So all the startup is doing is it's a very basic web API configuration. It's basically just mapping in the trailing slash from the domain, and that's it. If we weren't actually to go to our API endpoint, we were just to hit if we weren't able to go to the web API endpoint, so the trailing slash, API slash, and then our controller, and we just went to the domain endpoint, we would be presented with the welcome to running ASP.NET Core on AWS Lambda. So there is a fallback just in case we don't actually go through our controller routing. All right, let's quickly jump into the controller, and then I'll take you through the AWS defaults, which is what we use for both serverless and function, and the actual serverless template. So the controller itself is the same as a standard controller. However, you'll notice I have added a few additions, which is a couple of private variables, and the controller, the values controller, and then pulling environmental variables. So this is an important thing because I want to show you how we load environmental variables without actually having to get into the console and log them out. And then the only other changes I've done from there is calling those private variables in my get function for the API get. Now, I've done one thing during a demo last night. What I really don't like in the standard, you'll see it'll be API slash and then the controller name. I don't like that. Generally, when I create an API, my domain name says api.domain.com, and then it's /version/controller. So what I was doing last night in my demo was saying, well, here is how I handle my version domain, my version routing, and then the controller. There are two different ways as a .NET developer to develop a web API through a controller. There is the controller routing, and then using the functions as the verb. So you can see down here we've got HTTP get, get with ID, post, and then just using the actual function as the get, post, and the like, so our verb, or actually doing in controller routing. So actually attributing your function, giving it a specific name other than the verb, and then actually doing your routing. So I can add HTTP get here, and I can add my attributes for routing. Didn't step through the different options, but I can add my routing to the attribute, and then I can actually create multiple resources under that controller. So it would be version 1/controller name. So in this case, it would be values, version 1/values/, and then I might have another resource name, and then I can have /ID or /something else. And then so there's a lot more we can do in terms of the functionality in a controller than just a single controller with all of the available HTTP verbs. All right, I'm going to leave it at that because now we're getting more into the discussion around practices and patterns around how to develop controllers and how to structure your logic. And that's probably for another day or a different topic. The important bit that I wanted to show you before I jump into the serverless template is we actually store all of our so when we use the CLI, we can do it, serverless deploy. We can then provision all of our parameters, like what we need for the profile that we're going to use for the account. So I don't have to have CLI as a .NET developer. I may not be familiar with AWS, so I don't have the AWS CLI installed onto the machine that I'm developing. But what I do need to have is in my user profile on my machine is the .aws folder. In that folder is a credentials file. All you need to have is the name and key. So the profile name and the key for that profile in that folder. So if you don't have CLI installed, not a problem. Just make sure you have the credentials so that when the template looks to do a deploy, it will go and look for the credentials for that profile. The other one is the region that we're deploying into. And in this case, our target framework. So this is the target framework for the for the Lambda. We're using .NET 6. Now, one thing that you will have to have set up, so if somebody's set up the environment for you to deploy into AWS using SAM, is you will need to have access to a bucket that then CloudFormation can access. So the tool can upload into S3. As you remember in our diagram, we had our S3 bucket, this guy over here. That needs to be provisioned. So somebody will have had to have set up the AWS account and created a bucket, but that's it. They just need to create the bucket. They don't need to create any subfolders or anything like that. It's just the bucket and provide the profile. So the actual account that you're connecting with must have access to that bucket, and that's it. From a more secure point of view, when I work with customers who aren't familiar with AWS, we have the DevOps team go and set up the AWS account, go and set up code pipelines. So they actually have a Git repository under AWS code. And then you could even use GitHub or whatever, and then actually have the pipeline during the build step run through the commands that we're going to have a look at soon to deploy out to serverless. So in terms of the developers, all they need to do is git add, git commit, git push. And then as soon as it goes up into the repo, all of what I'm about to show you will execute from the build server. And therefore, there is no need to have external access via an account or a profile through the tool. It'll actually only operate from the build server. But that's also another topic. All right, so the one thing, so here we're using the predefined bucket. The one thing that it will create automatically for you when the template's created is the S3 prefix. So the prefix, it will just be the name of the project, which will create a folder in that bucket just to isolate it from any other projects. I probably should have shown you this one I created earlier, which may help you understand the differences between what I've done and what is default. Melnet. Okay, so this is your default. Here you'll see that the S3 bucket is not there. The prefix is, and the profile is not filled in, the region is not filled in. So that's default when you first install. And then the one that I'm running through is the one that I've made changes to. We're going to have a look at the serverless template very soon. So this is our CloudFormation template that it uses to deploy. Then one additional parameter set that I've added is templated parameters. So we want to make this a self-contained application. So we're actually, there's no dependency problems. So it's basically self-contained. There's no, like dependency issues with other external libraries and the like. So that's it. And then we give the stack a name. So when you're going through the command line, if you don't have a stack name, it'll ask you to provision a stack name and the like. But this is just so that the serverless template here gets deployed into CloudFormation using the stack name that we define. So that's it in terms of default. That will become more apparent why we're doing that in a sec. And then we have, I'll just quickly run through this, I think, and then I need to hand over to Matt for his demo. Very quickly, the CloudFormation template is as simple as this. It's essentially creating a serverless function, and then with that serverless function, it's hooking up the function handler. So this is the bit that actually does the link between our Lambda entry point with the function handler for Lambda, and then obviously remembering the Lambda entry point then calls startup, and the rest of it is standard API, web API. Runtime is .NET 6. The environmental variables. So here's the difference. Instead of adding environmental variables to your Lambda tools defaults, when doing a serverless deploy, they must be in your template, the serverless template. Having them in the Lambda tools defaults will be ignored for a serverless deploy. They will only be used if they're in the tools defaults if you're doing a function deploy, which is the difference between a full stack or just a single function. Then the rest of it is, as I said in the diagram, we're creating an API gateway, so it's just API and it's a proxy straight through to the function. So we're setting it up as an event because this is linking both the API gateway with the function, and that's it. I probably don't have time to actually run through and do the deploy, but if we were to do a deploy, it would just be .NET Lambda serverless.deploy, and then it will actually go and read from our defaults. So instead of having to add all the parameters to the CLI, it'll read from the defaults, it'll use the template, and then it will provision everything out to the cloud, and then here is my pre-provisioned endpoint. I've got two controllers. I've said this is using environment variable 3, which is 678. What I'll do is I'll go back to values.
You paste it into the stream afterwards as well.
Do the get. Yep. I can copy and paste this. Yeah, so you can see now my environmental variables, value equals 1, 2, 3, and 3, 4, 5. They were set here. Environmental variable 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8. And they were, if you remember, in our controller over here, all I've done is system environment get environmental variable 1, 2, and 3, assign them to the private variables, and then called them. So value 1 is environment variable 1, value 2 is environment variable 2. And there's the response there. So you can see that we're actually executing the API gateway proxy through to the Lambda and response. Now, this is the first time I've actually hit this endpoint this morning. So for the question around cold start, I didn't really see a lag when I hit the values /1, 2, 3. So that would have been a cold start. So that was pretty quick. I will stop sharing and hand it over to Matt.
Cool. Yeah, I was going to say disciple of Jesus. Paul's been mostly writing back, but it's been a good discussion there as well around do we pre-warm lambdas, right? And I think what you do is you see what the performance is like from a cold start, and if that's good enough, that's great. If you need to warm particular ones, choose the ones decisively is the advice that I'd give to keep awake. And there's multiple ways to do that. Like there's a Lambda warmer package. There's like the feature.
There's also provision concurrency. Like it does cost slightly more because you're now having some provision concurrency, but it will help with warm because you now have a minimum of 1 active, or 2 active instances.
Yeah, and so like provision concurrency is our way to like guarantee warm lambdas. So any other mechanism like pinging lambdas or start calling the lambdas, like whilst that works, it's relying on knowing effectively feeling out what is going on behind the scenes. So it is not a guarantee to happen. So the official AWS response is provision concurrency is the way to have your lambdas warm all the time. However, by the community has understood that Lambda is operating and working a certain way. There are micro containers that are starting up, and that takes a bit of time. And so by pinging it every couple of minutes, we've seen that if you were to go ahead and do the test yourself, you would find that roughly every 10 minutes, the Lambda will recycle the underlying container that it's running on and operating on, and then you'll see cold start again. So any of those like community-based frameworks or mechanisms to ping to keep lambdas warm, whilst they work, there's no guarantee that will work like forever, because the next iteration of Lambda will allow you to deploy and run and execute Lambda functions the same way you've always done. But the underlying implementation might be something different that says, we've got a new mechanism to make cold start really, really fast, but pinging them and keeping them alive, that's just not going to work in the future. So provision concurrency is the official answer, but all of those Lambda warmers have been around for a long, long time. So you can feel reasonably safe that they're pretty good ways to keep your Lambda functions warm.
Excellent. Now I had the same problem as you, Paul. Chrome is not letting me share my screen. So give me 2 seconds. I might end up having to jump across to Firefox.
You'll never guess what browser I'm using at the moment because I had the same problem.
You're on Firefox as well.
No.
What browser?
Who's the only one using? Who's the only one using Windows here?
Safari.
No.
There's other browsers.
Yeah.
Brave?
Very brave. You're on mute, Paul.
Is Internet Explorer 6. You're using Internet Explorer 6.
I'm using Edge.
Yeah, I said Edge, but I was on mute. I said it twice. I'm
Yeah,
sure
I'm using Edge.
I knew it was Edge. I was just like pulling you. Okay, so I'm just going to log into the stream on Firefox. So give me 2 seconds. I was going to quickly share my screen to show another thing, but I've posted the link. Opera, yeah. I've pasted the link in the chat as well. We just got the announcement that the summit landing page is up. So anyone that's from Australia, New Zealand, interested in the Australia-New Zealand summit, we've got the landing zone page up, so you can register. like all three of us are actually going to be in Sydney for Summit. So we've got a special night Australia time stream planned, but we're going to do the regular stream when Summit happens next month as well. So we're going to have some extra streamage, which is going to be really cool.
And we'll be able to show a little bit of what's happening, because there are, there's a couple of in-person events that are happening around that time. It's not as large as it usually is, but at pre-pandemic. So we'll have everything will be online, but we'll be there in person. There's some deep racer events and some other sessions that are going on at the time. If anybody's in Sydney and reach out to us and let us know.
Yep. And so, am I getting double audio? You guys aren't getting distracted by me?
No, I can hear you. One stream of audio.
Okay, good. I'm getting double audio because I've logged in twice. So what I do want to do is share. Where are we? My screen.
Here we go.
No, wrong one.
Share the wrong window.
Behind the scenes.
You got to see our little studio, how we move the tiles around and set the background images up and so forth. But I think, Aaron, go back to yours. There's still a lot of people building .NET applications. Many of my customers are still building Lambdas in .NET. It's not all Python and JavaScript. So it's really good to see that. And secondly, it's good to see that if you're running Web API, you can run it locally the way you normally would, like just go to your IDE and click, run, debug, and do steps through debugging, whatever you need to do. But then take that same function and deploy it into Lambda and have it work.
So I just came out of the Melbourne.net meetup last night, and I was pleasantly surprised to hear that there are actually a lot more .NET startups, like still corporate startups, so like big business groups starting smaller organizations based on .NET and not specifically .NET for Azure. They're like multi-cloud. So this is why I was at the stand-up, was to, as a representative of AWS, talk about .NET. Like, what are we doing? There's a lot happening in the business world around .NET. It's it's not by any means a dying language or framework.
I don't know why you need to mention that, Aaron. It's like clearly not. It's
I'm
like
valid.
It's like,
I swear I'm valid.
It's like Objective C, right? And Cold Fusion and in every other language that we use. Like, Paul's one of the leading Cold Fusion guys. I started in Objective C, and it's like, even though Swift is out, like a lot of like Apple's ecosystem still relies very heavily on Objective C. So I've got my screen share working.
Oh, you go, yeah.
And basically, Summit is online, so you're correct. But there's going to be a small section of it that's going to be hosted live and in person. So we're keeping the numbers down, making sure that everyone can keep safe. So most of what you'll watch will be online. But there will be a couple of people that will come in person in Sydney for a couple of the events that we have. And we're running a studio show, which is like how we're kind of getting involved with Summit. And there's going to be a little bit of a floor. Like for those that can't turn up in person, we're going to go guerrilla style, and we're going to share a little bit off the floor and a little bit of like what we saw happening live, from the Summit building as well. So we'll give everyone a bit of a taste. But go through. The agenda looks really, really good, and I know we're right on time, but I do have to show my one, so I'll try and be quick with this one. Coming from Melbourne, one of the things that you might notice is that we're very, very opinionated about our coffee. Like I've got my little takeout coffee here. Sometimes you'll see me drink that on the stream. We all have coffee machines at home these days as well. Coffee prices have risen. That was like our news for like the one week, and Paul just like would not like be quiet about the fact that it was going up 50 cents, which is outrageous. So this is my little coffee review site, and I've made it with NextJS, and I'm using NextJS 11 to build this. As you can see by the URL, I'm hosting on Amplify, And the point of this was like Amplify is good for like native applications. You can build things with Flutter. You can build things with React. There's support for Angular apps, Vue apps. But we hadn't really had many examples of using like a framework that also supports server-side rendering. So that's why I went down the React side, and I had a couple of cool learnings from it. Now the site is super simple, right? Like I basically lorem ipsum everything for my demos. So it's like, Matt here, this is my collection of favorite coffee places, taking some photos. I've got this like list that's actually all like dynamically collected from a Lambda. So I've got like this little backend that's keeping all these locations and the data of those locations, inside of Lambda. A little bit hard coded. I should probably tie it to a database eventually, but I haven't in this case. I put a little bit about the place, and I put a mini review, and I put my score there as well. So, like these are not real coffee stores, but if you kind of know Melbourne well enough, you can kind of like work out like what the actual names are. I was trying to not infringe on copyright for my demos. But yeah, so this is just a nice little app. All of this is loaded from a Lambda in the back end. So I feel like we're very Lambda heavy today, which is nice. The pictures are dynamically fetched from S3, but I'm using NextJS. This is image library too. And the hosting is all set up with Amplify pretty easily. So every time that I make a change to my code, I am basically pulling in that change from GitHub. And I'm pulling that through on a particular branch into Amplify. Amplify's built a CI/CD pipeline for me. If it fails deployment, it doesn't override this existing branch and my existing hosting for this branch as well. And if it goes through successfully, I see the update for that URL that I've made. So I can have like this nice little unthought out CI/CD flow, very minimal effort, which is nice. And I could have like dev, UAT, and prod, and dev I could have password protected as well. And like you might ask, like, is an Amplify using S3 to do serving of the React apps? And it's like, yep. And so what's different to support Next.js is that we're also tying this with Lambda at the edge, so that we can have more dynamicism and replicate like an SSR type experience. Words broke there. I know, Paul.
I think that's the key thing, right? For anybody that has not explored Next and needs to understand why you would go ahead and use Next, the predominant reason is so that you have a very nice server-side rendered feel to your application. For people that are maybe not front-end developers, you build something in React, you hit the website, and if you right-click and view source, you're going to see like 6 lines of code, like one div, and then after the fact, JavaScript renders, and manipulates a DOM after the fact. DOM. Yeah. And so, with if you think about what server-side rendering is and Next.js is supposed to do, is for that initial hit, it renders server-side, serves out the HTML so that you don't have to wait for pieces to load. It also provides the ability for like the bots and the trawlers to go through the website and explore the website, actually how it looks and feels, rather than like waiting for the JavaScript to load. So you can typically get better SEO when you've got server-side rendered. And as well as it just feels like it's all going to come at once. It feels a little quicker. And then with Next, once that server-side rendered, a piece of HTML has come to your application. From then on, it takes like what you would normally see and feel with React application. It just navigates around how it feels on the front end and continues to change the rendering on the front end without calling back to the server.
Yeah, so I promise to keep it fairly quick. But the way that this happens with Next.js, a little bit of the magic is that rather than having like a get props call to call the information dynamically, what you do is you go, I want to, when this page loads, I want to call from the back end this particular content. And so it might call the first 5 coffee locations from this Lambda, for example. So we'll get this initial data. This will be server-side generated data fed through to the client. And if the client continued to scroll, like the customer continued to scroll the site and it needed to load the next 5, then the next 5, then the next 5, it would be basically making like get props calls to then collect the next lot of data that's needed asynchronously.
Can I call out too that back on the server side rendering side of things, a lot of people, a lot of modern front end developers who are sort of just graduating and coming into the industry now are actually coming in and going like, "Wow, this is cool! This new way of doing things, which is server side rendering." Just want to call out that no, this is going back to the way we used to do it. So server side rendering is like MVC, right? When I was talking about Razor and MVC, this is server side rendering.
Viper, MVVM.
That's right. That's right. So we're just applying a new way of doing an older pattern. So using JavaScript frameworks, using Node.js, using these more modern techniques to do, or more modern frameworks and languages to do an older pattern and technique.
Yeah. I never say that, but like literally, like that's what I always think, right? Because I'm like, we had this kind of like walkthrough, right, where it's like, the web was a little bit static. Things didn't load dynamically. You'd go to a website, and if there was updated data that was coming through, like you were looking at a real-time dashboard, you usually have to refresh the page to see that, or you'll be doing some very funky, complicated, and many AJAX calls, like if you've got a real-time dashboard, for example. If you're scrolling along a Facebook feed, like it's doing lots of AJAX calls to kind of like load the next set of data. But a lot of the site itself stays static. So if you changed your username, it wouldn't actually pick that up until you do a full refresh. So it's like sites could be kind of dynamic, but kind of not. And so what the JavaScript frameworks did really well is they decided to run everything client side. So you don't pay as much on compute, which is good. And you also got the advantage that you could have many different calls happening all at once. And so whenever there was an update, you could have a refresh of the virtual DOM, show that new updated information that's been fed through, and have all that information updated in the right points of the app. And that was like fantastic. And so everyone kind of went heavily on the React side. But what they did notice was you lost the ability to have fine control over your SEO, like exactly, Paul. And that's important for feeding search engines like information about your site so people can find you when they do like a Google search. The other thing that happened is like some people's devices aren't the same as other people's devices. So some devices would struggle to run a web application sometimes, strange as it sounds. Some devices had poor internet connectivity as well, so even though they're a pretty strong or good device, it would take a while for the initial load of a site because it might have to pull down like 20 megs of resources. And so what we've essentially seen is like NextJS and these SSR type frameworks that have come up are kind of like a meet in the middle, I would call it. So you get good SEO. You manage to basically have things pre-rendered and not resource intensive for an initial load. So initial load can be done fast on a device. Then you get the dynamicism of all the information that gets updated coming to life. Everything feels real-time. Information is flowed through in real time because Next.js is really using like React under the hood for that real-time side of the equation, right? So if I go to my imports, you can see I'm using Next for a lot of this. Like, I'm using Next images to show my images and this and that. But then I go into my package.json, and what you'll find is like literally Next is using Next and React, right? So under the hoods. So Next is really like an addition on top of React. And because it is doing a lot of server-side rendered stuff, Amplify has done some cool changes with Lambda at the edge so that we can dynamically generate information, feed it through to a device when they call the website, which is pretty awesome. So that's pretty much it for a quick demo. But
I have to make one call out, Matt.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think you've used it twice now, so it's an official word.
Perfect.
Dynamicism.
It legitimately is. It's Kiwi English.
Okay.
Yep.
The synchronicity of dynamicism.
Exactly. Yep. That's when things are an ism. Like so they're like not just dynamic. It's like they're in movement dynamically.
Love it.
Cool. So
yeah. Go, man.
No, so I was just going to make a call out, like, come to Summit if you're in Australia, New Zealand. Use that link that I'll put up on the screen here to basically register yourselves. It'd be great to see you online. We will be live at Summit, so you'll be able to chat with us even if you don't if you're not able to make it in person. And then secondarily, just because we all like discounts, definitely screenshot that URL or go back to our YouTube channel or Twitch archives. Grab that if you want a discount if you're looking at going for certification. What were you going to add, Paul?
I was just going to say, I hope like that people liked having the 3 mini segments, and if there's anything we should dive into, let us know. We just thought it was fun to do 3 very disparate things that ended up being something that we'd worked on with our customer base recently. So real world scenario pieces.
Perfect. Well, I hope everyone enjoys their week. And one other thing I forgot to call out at the very start is we always do 12 p.m. AED tea time, our streams. We did have a 1 hour change last week. So if you're wondering why we're starting an hour early,
AEST
for a lot of people, now. AEST, yep. Yeah. So if you're wondering why we're starting an hour early, it's because we've had a time zone change. But same time here right now for the next 6 months. Join us at 12 p.m. AEST time.
Yeah, standard time.
Standard time. We'll catch everyone next week. Hope you all enjoy your weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Take care all.
See ya.